So I finished this a couple days ago and I feel like I needed a little time to just kind of like sit with it because I feel about this book the way that I feel about They Both Die at the End. And that both is and is not a good thing. Okay, so They Both Die at the End is a book about a world where you know the day you're going to die, and then the day you're going to die, you can kind of meet up with someone who is also going to die that day, or someone who's willing to spend the day with someone who's going to die, and they have a good time together, and then these two, the main characters, like they fall in love and whatnot, and then one of them makes tea at the very end of the day and dies, and then the other guy dies because they're in the apartment explosion when it happens. And oh my god, I read this book a couple years ago and it still pisses me off the way that this ending happened, because it just felt like we were being pushed towards the end, not necessarily that the ending was kind of like organic in any way. Because the problem with They Both Die at the End is that they know they're going to die at the end. So at the end of the book, when one of the characters is like, I'm going to go make a pot of tea at like an hour before the end of the day, like, what? You're going to turn on a stove the day you're going to die? Are you kidding me? And it's that sequence of events that leads the other kid to like get hit by a car, or like however he dies. I don't know, just this was infuriating. I was vibing with the romance, I was vibing with the world building until that end happened. I'm like, you're telling me no one has ever just like sat completely still the day of their death, like their death day, or like just gone to the park and sat there for like the full day until they outlasted it and then come home? Like, come on, man. This was like a less infuriating version of that. As a disclaimer, I liked this book all the way up until like the very, very end. Spoilers ahead for the ending of A Song to Drown Rivers. So Zishi, the main character, we follow her like throughout like this whole story where she has to seduce this king, but the whole time she really wants like the captain of the guard of like the king of her homeland, Fan Li. And when she does everything that she sets out to do, and the other kingdom is defeated, and the king that's been romancing her, willing to risk it all for her this whole time, he meets his ultimate fate. Zishi goes home, and there's a lot of discourse about like what the king of her homeland is going to do with her now. And Fan Li leaves her a note, but then the note has like blood smudged on it, so it's like, hey, like, don't trust whatever or something. She just kind of like goes about her business and is summarily killed by the assassins of the king that she just spent this whole book working for. And it was at that point that the wool fell from my eyes, because I was so here for the forbidden romance. I was here for the longing and the yearning and like the potential between Zishi and Fan Li that they could have, that even like in his absence they were exploring. But as soon as that happened to Zishi, I was like, Fan Li had some idea that something like this could happen. You're telling me he couldn't spare a guard to be on her ass the whole time she was home until he could then reach her? Because I know like he had to do like wartime things, so he wasn't like specifically, he wasn't like supposed to be there for her. And sure, fine, he couldn't be there. You're telling me he couldn't spare like a guard? Like he couldn't have like his right hand man that we spend a lot of time with, like just hang out with Zishi, or just be like in her periphery outside of her sight, so it's not like, so like he doesn't make it hot? You're telling me that he couldn't do that? Like, are you kidding me? It just felt like a really big oversight on Fan Li's part. And Fan Li is characterized as a man who does not make those kind of oversights. And at this point, we know he's in love with Zishi and has been this whole time. You're telling me that like he didn't know? There's no way he didn't know. That being said, though, the book does bring it back when it comes to like Zishi being dead and like kind of like following Fan Li like as he avenges her death and walks away from the service and whatnot. And then, he eventually makes it to the underworld, and like that's beautiful. That I really liked. It just felt like the emotional payout of the ending is kind of predicated on Fawn Lee having an out of character moment, and that part sucked. But the rest of the book I vibed with. I will say though, Zishi is stronger than me, because if I had been in her position and the king was like ride or die for me and was actually like a human under like all of the tyranny and all of that, that could have been like a morally gray book boyfriend situation, and Zishi didn't fall for it. Good for her. I would have had a harder time. I do need to say though that like the one time where like Zishi sees Fan Li again, there's like this moment where Zishi's like cover slips and she says Fan Li's name instead of the king's name while she's alone with the king doing like cutesy king shit. And the king like understandably freaks out about that. He's like, "What the fuck? Like, why are you talking about like Fan Li?" And Zishi had been through all this training with Fan Li, and it just felt like it felt a little cheap. That's like, oh no, like you needed to bring in like this, like the forbidden love aspect so you could remind the king that Fan Li exists. And then they can have like that whole moment, whatever. So that way she gets like the stolen moment with him. But it also felt really out of character on Zishi's part because Zishi at this point is very well trained and has been playing the king like a fiddle. So that's like this inciting incident. And then the end that feels like it's predicated on a main character acting out of character. I think if I hadn't read They Both Die at the end before I had read this like some years ago, I think the ending of this might have punched me in the chest a lot harder than it did. But because I did read They Both Die at the end, when the ending of this happened, I was just kind of like, oh, are you kidding me, Fondly? Are you kidding me? That being said, though, this hits on like a lot of tropes that I personally enjoy. Like as an El Real girly, the forbidden love is just gorgeous. The yearning and the pining. Like, yes, absolutely, give all that shit to me. I just wish that the ending had gone down a little bit differently, where Fond Li and Zishi, to a lesser extent, were acting more in character and were acting with the knowledge that I know that they have.